At 78, Benny Andersson has reached a stage of life where memories matter more than applause. After decades of being celebrated as one of the creative forces behind one of the world's most successful pop groups, he has begun speaking with a level of honesty that was once impossible. Looking back on the extraordinary journey of ABBA, he no longer sees only packed arenas, chart-topping records, or international fame. Instead, he remembers the quieter moments that existed behind the scenes, the uncertainty, the emotional distance, the sacrifices, and the complicated relationships that shaped the music millions of people still cherish today. To many fans, ABBA represented joy, celebration, and timeless melodies that could instantly lift anyone's spirits. Yet, Benny now reflects on a different reality. Beneath those unforgettable harmonies was a group of individuals trying to understand themselves while carrying pressures that few outsiders could ever imagine. Long before the world knew his name, Benny's relationship with music had nothing to do with success. As a young boy growing up in Sweden, music wasn't a career path or a dream of celebrity. It was simply a natural part of everyday life. His family surrounded him with traditional folk songs, classical compositions, and the sounds of instruments that carried generations of history. Those early experiences taught him something far more valuable than technical ability. They taught him that music could communicate feelings that words often failed to express. While other children spent their free time imagining adventures, Benny became fascinated by melodies, chord progressions, and the subtle emotional changes created by a single note. Even before he fully understood harmony, he instinctively recognized that music possessed an emotional language unlike anything else. Those early lessons would eventually become the foundation of everything he created. While audiences around the world would later associate ABBA with glittering costumes, energetic performances, and infectious pop anthems, Benny always approached songwriting from a much deeper place. He wasn't interested in simply producing songs that sounded fashionable or commercially successful. Instead, he searched for emotional truth hidden inside every composition. Even the brightest melody needed a shadow somewhere beneath it. Even the happiest chorus required a hint of longing to make it feel genuine. That balance between joy and sadness became one of the defining characteristics of ABBA's music, although many listeners couldn't quite explain why those songs affected them so deeply. When Benny eventually partnered with Björn Ulvaeus, something remarkable happened. Their creative strengths fit together almost perfectly. Björn possessed an extraordinary gift for storytelling through lyrics, while Benny instinctively understood how music could magnify every emotion those words contained. Their collaboration wasn't simply about writing songs. It was about building emotional experiences. Benny would spend hours experimenting with harmonies, searching endlessly for the exact progression that could transform an ordinary lyric into something unforgettable. Björn would then shape stories that reflected universal emotions, love, regret, hope, heartbreak, longing, and together they created songs that seemed deceptively simple while hiding astonishing emotional complexity beneath the surface. Inside the recording studio, Benny developed a reputation for extraordinary patience. Others might have considered a recording complete after a few successful takes, but Benny rarely believed the work was finished. He could spend an entire day adjusting a harmony that lasted only a few seconds. Sometimes he replayed the same passage dozens of times, not because he demanded technical perfection, but because he felt something emotionally wasn't quite right. He believed listeners could sense honesty in music, even if they couldn't consciously identify why. Every arrangement, every pause, every instrument had to serve the emotional purpose of the song. If a note felt artificial, it distracted from the truth he was trying to communicate. This relentless pursuit of authenticity often went unnoticed outside the studio. Fans naturally focused on performers standing beneath the lights. Agnetha Faltskog and Annie Frid Lyngstad became the public faces of ABBA, admired for their remarkable voices, beauty, and charisma. Cameras followed them wherever they went. Magazines celebrated their personal lives, and audiences instantly recognized them across the globe. Benny, however, remained largely invisible to the public despite shaping nearly every musical element that defined the group's sound. While the singers received standing ovations, Benny usually stood quietly behind keyboards or inside control rooms, carefully listening for details no one else seemed to notice. That position suited his personality in many ways. He never craved celebrity for its own sake. Yet over time, a quiet frustration slowly developed. He realized that millions of people knew ABBA's songs, but very few understood where those melodies truly came from. The emotional architecture hidden beneath every recording often passed unnoticed. Listeners remember the chorus, the costumes and performances, but rarely consider the countless hours spent constructing arrangements capable of surviving decades without losing their emotional power. Within the group itself, Benny also found himself carrying responsibilities that extended beyond composing music. Whenever disagreements emerged or creative tensions threatened progress, he frequently became the person responsible for restoring balance. Instead of expressing his own frustrations, he often concentrated on solving everyone else's problems. It was an exhausting role that gradually became part of his identity. He acted as the stabilizing force holding everything together, while quietly ignoring his own emotional needs. The burden wasn't dramatic enough to attract attention, yet it slowly accumulated over the years until it became impossible to ignore. Perhaps what made Benny's work so distinctive was his ability to create emotional contradictions that felt completely natural. Some of ABBA's most uplifting songs contain subtle traces of sadness hidden beneath joyful rhythms. Audiences danced enthusiastically to melodies that quietly carried themes of loneliness, uncertainty, or longing. Those emotional layers weren't accidental. Benny believed happiness felt more believable when touched by vulnerability. Pure optimism often sounded artificial, but hope emerging from sadness felt genuine. That understanding allowed ABBA's music to resonate with listeners from completely different cultures, generations, and backgrounds because the emotions beneath the melodies reflected universal human experiences. Benny also embraced technological innovation at a time when many musicians remained hesitant. Rather than viewing synthesizers and advanced recording techniques as gimmicks, he saw them as entirely new emotional tools. Layer by layer, he built rich musical landscapes that felt larger than traditional pop recordings. Instead of allowing technology to replace feeling, he used it to deepen emotional expression. Every echo, every harmony, every carefully placed instrument became another voice contributing to the overall emotional conversation taking place inside the song. One of Benny's greatest strengths was understanding silence. He recognized that music wasn't created solely through sound, but also through carefully controlled absence. Sometimes the most powerful emotional moment arrived not during the loudest chorus, but during a brief pause before it. Those moments allowed listeners to breathe, anticipate, and emotionally connect before the melody continued. Such restraint required enormous confidence. Many musicians constantly filled every available space with notes, but Benny understood that silence itself could become part of the composition. As he's reflected on his life in recent years, Benny has admitted something deeply personal. Music often became his preferred method of processing emotions he struggled to express directly, rather than confronting difficult conversations. He sat at the piano, rather than explaining his fears, disappointments, or regrets to those closest to him. He transformed those feelings into melodies. The piano never judged him, never interrupted him, and never required explanations. It simply accepted every emotion he poured into it. At the time, this approach felt natural. He believed he was expressing himself honestly through his compositions. Only much later did he begin recognizing the hidden cost of that habit. While music allowed him to explore emotions with remarkable depth, it also gave him a convenient way to avoid confronting those same emotions in everyday life. Instead of resolving conflicts through conversation, he translated them into songs. Instead of revealing vulnerability directly to the people he loved, he allowed audiences around the world to hear emotions that those closest to him never experienced firsthand. Looking back now, Benny understands that this emotional pattern shaped far more than his creative process. It influenced friendships, relationships, and even the way he experienced ABBA's extraordinary success. Fame itself never truly satisfied him because recognition could never replace genuine emotional connection. No amount of applause could fill spaces left by conversations that never happened or feelings that remained unspoken. Although millions admired the music he created, he sometimes felt strangely isolated inside the very success that everyone else envied. For outsiders, ABBA appeared almost magical. They seemed to possess everything people dreamed about: wealth, worldwide admiration, timeless success, and artistic brilliance. Yet beneath that polished image stood individuals carrying invisible emotional burdens that fame could neither erase nor solve. Benny now believes those hidden struggles became inseparable from the music itself. The songs weren't merely entertainment. They became places where complicated emotions could safely exist without needing immediate solutions. And perhaps that quiet honesty is why their music continues touching people decades later. For Benny, the emotional distance that gradually became part of his personality did not begin during the height of ABBA's success. It had been developing quietly for years, shaped by habits that seemed harmless at first. He learned early in life that feelings were easier to organize when they were transformed into melodies instead of spoken aloud. Music became both his refuge and his shield. Whenever life became confusing or painful, he instinctively moved toward a piano rather than toward another person. That pattern worked brilliantly for his career because every difficult experience enriched his songwriting, but it created challenges in his personal relationships that became increasingly difficult to ignore. Among those relationships, none was more significant than the one he shared with Frida. Their connection grew naturally through endless hours spent working together. Unlike ordinary romances that begin with long conversations or carefully planned dates, theirs developed through creativity. They spent countless nights refining songs, experimenting with arrangements, and discovering how their different personalities complemented each other inside the recording studio. Music gave them a language that felt effortless. They could communicate emotions through harmonies that neither of them found easy to express through ordinary conversation. At first, that connection felt almost magical. Benny admired Frida's openness and emotional intensity, while she appreciated his quiet intelligence and extraordinary musical instincts. Together, they seemed to complete each other creatively. Frida brought warmth, spontaneity, and emotional transparency into every recording session. Benny contributed structure, patience, and almost supernatural ability to shape feelings into unforgettable melodies. Their differences strengthened the music, allowing each song to carry both emotional vulnerability and musical precision. Yet the very qualities that made them exceptional creative partners also created difficulties in everyday life. Frida experienced emotions openly and immediately. If she felt happiness, sadness, frustration, or love, those feelings naturally appeared in her words and actions. Benny approached emotions differently. Instead of discussing them, he analyzed them internally until they eventually emerged through music. While Frida hoped for conversations that could resolve misunderstandings, Benny often responded with silence, believing time or music would accomplish what words could not. Neither approach was intentionally hurtful. They simply reflected two completely different ways of experiencing the world. Unfortunately, love often requires more than good intentions. It requires communication, vulnerability, and a willingness to sit with uncomfortable emotions together. Those were precisely the situations Benny found most difficult. Every unresolved disagreement quietly accumulated beneath the surface, finding expression not in conversations, but in new songs that audiences would later celebrate without realizing how personal they truly were. As the years passed, the emotional gap between them slowly widened. The public continued to see glamorous photographs, successful tours, and smiling appearances, unaware that much of the communication taking place between Benny and Frida was happening indirectly through music. A melody might contain an apology that was never spoken aloud. A lyric might express regret that never appeared in conversation. A heartbreaking arrangement could reveal emotions that remained completely hidden once recording sessions ended. Benny has reflected that he often felt more emotionally available while composing and while sitting across the dinner table. Inside the studio, he could expose every fear, every doubt, and every hope without embarrassment because the music carried those emotions for him. Outside the studio, however, vulnerability became much more frightening. Real conversations required immediate responses, uncertainty, and the possibility of rejection. Music felt safer because it allowed him complete control over how emotions were presented. Frida needed something different. She wanted presence rather than interpretation, conversation rather than composition. She wanted the person behind the songs, not only the songs themselves. As beautiful as Benny's music was, it could never entirely replace emotional closeness. Eventually, she began to realize that although millions of listeners could hear his deepest feelings, she often could not. This painful contradiction became one of the hidden realities behind some of ABBA's most emotionally powerful recordings. Songs that audiences embraced as universal stories of heartbreak often contain echoes of private struggles unfolding inside the band itself. Listeners heard timeless ballads about love, regret, separation, and longing, never fully realizing how closely those emotions reflected the lives of the people creating them. The music possessed such extraordinary emotional honesty precisely because it drew from genuine experience. Ironically, the very success of those songs reinforced Benny's habit of expressing himself through composition instead of conversation. Each time audiences connected deeply with his work, it confirmed his belief that music could communicate everything that needed to be said. Yet while strangers around the world understood those emotions, the people closest to him often remained uncertain about what he truly felt. The applause that followed each new release couldn't solve the silence that continued at home. Looking back with decades' perspective, Benny has acknowledged this painful reality with remarkable humility. He no longer tries to defend the choices he made during those years. Instead, he recognizes that he often gave his finest words to songs while leaving important conversations unfinished. It was never a question of lacking love or commitment. Rather, he simply trusted music more than he trusted his own ability to explain himself face to face. This realization has become one of the most meaningful reflections of his later life. Rather than blaming anyone else for what happened, Benny accepts that emotional avoidance carried consequences. He understands now that artistic brilliance cannot substitute for genuine human connection, no matter how beautiful the music becomes. Songs may preserve feelings forever, but relationships require those feelings to be shared directly. As personal relationships became increasingly complicated, another quieter struggle was developing within ABBA itself. From the outside, the group appeared perfectly balanced, with each member contributing equally to its phenomenal success. In reality, public attention rarely reflected the actual creative process. Magazine covers, television interviews, and promotional campaigns naturally focus on the singers standing at the front of the stage. Their voices, appearance, and personalities became inseparable from the group's public identity. Benny never resented Agnetha or Frida for receiving that attention. He understood the realities of entertainment and knew that audiences naturally connected with performers they could see. Nevertheless, there were moments when he wished more people recognized the invisible work happening behind every successful recording. Long before a song reached listeners, countless creative decisions had already shaped its emotional impact. Every chord progression, orchestral arrangement, harmony, instrumental layer, and subtle transition required careful thought. Those details rarely attracted headlines, yet they formed the very foundation upon which ABBA's sound was built. Over time, Benny noticed that many people viewed him primarily as the technical musician of the group. He was often described as a composer, the keyboard player, or the musical craftsman responsible for arranging songs with remarkable precision. While these descriptions acknowledged his talent, they often overlooked something deeply important. They suggested calculation rather than emotion, craftsmanship rather than vulnerability. Nothing could have been further from the truth. Every musical decision Benny made originated from emotion before technique. When he searched endlessly for the perfect harmony, he wasn't chasing complexity for its own sake. He was searching for the exact emotional response he wanted listeners to experience. A single unexpected chord could communicate longing more effectively than an entire page of lyrics.